452,000. That's how many Social Security recipients are sitting right now with a federal student loan in default. And every one of them is exposed to having their monthly check cut before it ever reaches their bank account. 2 million more have already been told they were overpaid, and the government wants half of their check back starting now, whether the mistake was theirs or not. And more than 1 million older Americans, some of them in poor health, some of them caring for a sick spouse, are being told this year that their food assistance now comes with a job requirement attached. If you are over 60 or you love someone who is, stay with me for the next few minutes, because I promise you, the third one is the one almost nobody has heard about yet, and it is the one that is catching families completely off guard. I'm Richard Cole. I spent close to 20 years as an elder law attorney, sitting across the table from people who found out about a rule like this 1 month too late, after the money was already gone. I don't work for the government, and I'm not selling you anything today. My only job here is to read the fine print so you don't have to, and to tell you, in plain English, exactly what changed, who it hits, and exactly what you can do about it before it hits you. Because here is the part nobody tells you up front. For all three of these changes, there is a real, legal way to protect yourself. But it only works if you know it's coming, and if you move before the window closes. There are 3 changes here, and I'm going to walk through them one at a time. Stick with me through all 3, because the last one is quietly affecting more people than the first 2 combined, and almost nobody in that age group realizes it applies to them. Let's start with the one that used to only worry younger borrowers. If you have a federal student loan sitting in default, even one you co-signed years ago for a son, a daughter, or a grandchild, your Social Security check is now back on the table. This runs through something called the Treasury Offset Program, and after a long pandemic-era pause, the government has switched it back on. Here's who it hits. It's not just people who borrowed for themselves. Parent Plus loans and co-signed loans count too, and if that loan is in default, the law treats it as your debt, even if you never spent $1 of it on yourself. The number to know is 15%. The government can take up to 15% of your monthly Social Security benefit to pay down that defaulted loan, and there's only one real guardrail. Your check generally can't be pushed below $750 a month. That sounds protective until you do the math. If your check is $1,200, 15% is about $180 gone. Every single month, no phone call, no warning, just a smaller deposit. Here's your action step, and this is the part almost nobody uses. You can request a financial hardship exception directly from the Department of Education's default resolution group, showing that the offset would leave you unable to cover basic living expenses, and reviewers have historically been far more willing to grant these reductions for Social Security offsets than for tax refund offsets. Separately, you can get the loan out of default entirely through loan rehabilitation, which generally means 9 on-time payments over 10 months, or through consolidation. Once the loan is out of default, the offset stops completely, and your check is protected again. Call the number on any offset notice you receive. Ask specifically for a hardship review and start rehabilitation paperwork now, while you still have your full check in hand. But what happens if you've never borrowed a dime in your life? That's next. And it might be the scariest one, because this one doesn't care whether you did anything wrong at all. If Social Security ever decides, correctly or not, that it paid you too much at some point in the past, it can now hold back half of your monthly check to get that money back. Half. Not 10%, not a manageable trim, half of your entire benefit. Here's who this hits. It applies to retirement, survivor, and disability benefits, and it kicks in automatically for any new overpayment notice, regardless of whether the mistake was caused by your paperwork or theirs. And overpayments caused by the agency's own errors are not rare. The agency's own Inspector General has found tens of thousands of these mistakes traced directly back to processing errors, not to anything the beneficiary did. The number to hold on to is 50%. That's the default withholding rate now in place, and it applies unless you take action. But here's what most people never realize. You are not required to accept that. You have roughly 90 days from the date of the notice before withholding actually starts, and that window is your protection, not a formality. Inside that window, you can file a request for a lower rate of withholding and simply tell them what you can actually afford, 10% instead of 50%, and get your check most of the way back to whole while things get sorted out. And if you believe the overpayment is wrong, or that it truly was not your fault and repaying it would cause real hardship, you can file an appeal and a waiver request using SSA's own forms. And doing so within that window pauses the collection while your case is reviewed. People win these, but only the people who actually file the paperwork win them. Let me tell you about a woman named Linda. She's 71, lives alone on her Social Security check, and one afternoon a plain envelope shows up saying the agency overpaid her 3 years ago and intends to start taking half her check to fix it. She reads it 3 times. She never got a raise, never hit any income, never even knew the number had changed. As far as she can tell, if anyone made an error, it wasn't her. That confusion, that mix of fear and disbelief, is exactly what close to 2 million households are sitting with right now. Most of them assume there's nothing they can do about a government letter like that. That assumption is the single most expensive mistake in this entire story, because the paperwork to fix it exists, and it works, but only if it gets filed inside that 90-day window. Now, here's the one I told you to wait for, the one that's quietly pulling in a whole group of older Americans who used to be completely protected, and it has nothing to do with debt at all. This year, the rules for SNAP, the program most people still call food stamps, changed the age at which a work requirement kicks in. For years, adults in their late 50s and early 60s were simply exempt, full stop. That protection has been rolled back. Under the new law, the age range subject to the work requirement was pushed up from the mid-50s all the way to 64, meaning a huge group of people who assumed they were long past this now have to prove they're working, training, or volunteering at least 80 hours a month, about 20 hours a week, just to keep the food assistance they've counted on. Picture someone who left her job at 62 to care full-time for a husband with dementia. She hasn't retired in any comfortable sense. She's working around the clock, just not for a paycheck. And under the old rules, her age alone protected her benefits. Under the new rules, unless she files the right exemption paperwork, she's expected to document 20 hours a week of outside work or lose the help entirely. Analysts tracking this shift estimate more than 1 million older adults in that 55 to 64 range could be pushed off SNAP because of it. Many of them not because they were ineligible, but because they never turned in the paperwork proving they qualified for an exemption that still exists. And that's the good news buried in this one. The exemptions did not disappear. If you are medically unable to work, if you are caring for a dependent, such as a young grandchild, or an incapacitated family member, if you receive SSI or Social Security disability, or if you are already 65 or older, you are still exempt, full exemption, no work requirement at all past that age. The action step here is simple, and it matters more than almost anything else in this video. Contact your state SNAP office directly, ask which exemption applies to your specific situation, and get the documentation, a doctor's note, proof of caregiving, proof of disability benefits on file before your next recertification, not after a notice arrives saying your benefits have already been cut. So here's where all 3 of these leave you. The student loan offset can take up to 15% of a Social Security check for a defaulted loan, even when you co-signed for someone else. But hardship relief and loan rehabilitation can stop it. The overpayment clawback can now take half your check for a mistake that may never have been yours, but a 90-day window, a lower rate request, and a waiver can pull that number back down or erase it entirely. And the SNAP work requirement now reaches all the way to 64, pulling in people who used to be automatically protected, but real exemptions still exist for anyone who is disabled, caregiving, or already 65. The pattern underneath all 3 of these is the same. None of them announce themselves loudly. They show up as a smaller deposit, a plain envelope, or a quiet notice from a caseworker, and the people who get hurt are almost never the people who had no options. They're the people who had options and never knew to use them until the money was already gone. That's genuinely the whole game here, and knowing the rules is how you win it. This is general education, not legal or financial advice for your specific situation. And the details of how each rule applies can vary and can change, so always confirm your own case directly with the Social Security Administration, the Department of Education, or your state SNAP office before you act. If you made it this far, do one thing for me. Think of one person in your life living on a fixed income and send them this video today. One of these three could be about to touch their check, and there's a good chance they haven't heard a word about it yet. And if you want to know about the next rule change before it hits, instead of after, that's exactly what this channel is for. So consider subscribing. Because the truth is, none of these three systems are designed to warn you first. You have to be the one paying attention. I'm Richard Cole. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.